Hello there, my very good friends. Andy Murray here for What Culture Wrestling, and today we are going to talk about what really happened with WCW's Big Bang pay-per-view that never was. Let's go. The 26th of March 2001 will be etched in wrestling history forever. That was the night, of course, of the infamous WCW Nitro WWE Raw simulcast. It was Vince McMahon striding out proudly, wearing a Cheshire Cat grin on both TNN and TNT, revealing to the world that he had bought WCW. The rival promotion that had plagued him for so many years was his. And now, American pro wrestling at a mainstream level, well, the future of it was in Vince's hands. People were shocked, and that goes all the way from a fan level right up to those who were closest to the situation, or theoretically should have been closest to the situation, because I'm going to talk about Eric Bischoff here. He was as shocked as anyone else, which sounds kind of mental when you consider his status in WCW. Consider that he helped spur that company to 83 weeks of consecutive rating success against WWE Raw. Even he didn't see this coming. And this was off the back of a summer 2000 move that saw Eric raise funds of $67 million to try and pry the promotion away from Ted Turner. Where he failed, Vince McMahon had succeeded. Where the hell did it come from? Consider that number again for a second. $67 million. How much did Vince McMahon end up paying for WCW, its intellectual properties, and the contracts of 24 wrestlers? How much did the WWE chairman pay in his takeover? $2.5 million. 27 times less than Eric Bischoff. Let's spend the next 10 minutes or so answering a few questions on that. What the hell happened here? How did WCW go from preparing to relaunch with the Big Bang pay-per-view that year to being part of the McMahon wrestling empire? And speaking of the Big Bang, how would it have looked? Would it have been a fresh start, or would it have been more of the same for late era WCW, aka an absolute mess? Well, it turns out Eric Bischoff had a plan. You guys might not necessarily be familiar with the name Brian Beadle, but this guy was instrumental in what I'm about to talk about, because he was Eric Bischoff's key partner in attempting to purchase WCW for that $67 million. Beadle had founded the Classic Sports Network and was rallying behind Eric to help revamp and revitalize WCW for a new era of programming, kicking off in 2001. Beadle and Bischoff came together as Fusient Media Ventures, and they struck a deal with Ted Turner and his boys for $67 million to secure WCW's assets and ideally its future. Things were looking good for Beadle and Bischoff, with Brian using his connections to even score a venue for the upcoming Big Bang pay-per-view. This was going to be the grand coming out party for this new era of WCW. They struck that deal with the Hard Rock Group, and it was going to go down in Las Vegas. And as far as television goes, which is the lifeblood of many a mainstream pro wrestling company, well, talks were ongoing for a huge 10-year contract that would have seen WCW's primary program go out on a Wednesday. That would have effectively ended the era of direct competition with WWE. The Monday Night Wars, if they weren't over already, would have been officially over there and then. Even though Nitro may have continued as some kind of ongoing venture, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as important, with the big show going down on Wednesdays. Fusient's main concern was taking the tarnished, damaged reputation of WCW, rebuilding it, presenting a regular weekly TV product, and kicking all of this off with the Big Bang pay-per-view. It was coming together nicely, and by summer, it looked like Bischoff and Beadle were good to go. Eazy-E in particular was very fired up about saving a company that he'd effectively saved before. But then, predictably, went south. While he was vacationing in Hawaii with his family, Bischoff got a phone call from a panicked Beadle, who simply sighed down the phone and told him, "We're done." Here comes another key name in all of this. Jamie Kellner, who was a top-level executive at Turner Broadcasting. He was the one who had dealt the bad news that Brian Beadle was calling up Eric Bischoff about while he was on vacation. Kellner had decided to cancel all pro wrestling television on the network. This effectively left that 10-year deal in the toilet. Fusient were kinda screwed. They had no weekly TV platform on which to promote The Big Bang, and the position had become untenable. The deal was off the table. It's very difficult, of course, to promote and sell and make a pay-per-view viable unless you have a TV platform to do that. Now, the cancellation happened at very short notice as well. Bischoff and Beadle had very little time to react to this, and in that short window, well, here comes Daddy Vince, swooping in like a vulture, seizing top assets, and eventually taking WCW from under Fusient's nose. Eric Bischoff went from a prospective 50% owner of the second biggest wrestling promotion in the world to, well, nothing. And so the Big Bang became the WCW pay-per-view that never was. And it's a real shame, really, because on a recent episode of WWE Untold, Bischoff unraveled his plans for a pay-per-view that would have seen WCW reborn with more of an in-ring focus. It sounds very much like he wanted to get away from the soapier aspects of pro wrestling that WCW had more than indulged in throughout the 90s and, the year and a quarter of the 2000s that they lasted. Bischoff said that in-ring focus was something that the company had really been lacking, and if you look at their output over the past few years of their life, it's kind of easy to agree with him. But one guy who did disagree with all of this, and this might have been a critical point in this whole thing falling apart, was Beadle, who, when he has unpacked his visions for WCW 2.0, well, they're pretty damn different. Big Brian actually likened The Big Bang to an action movie come to life. It sounded a lot more in line with what WCW was already doing and what Vince McMahon was doing, of course, on the other channel. We're talking lots of pyro, lots of explosiveness, a big layer of gloss over the top, and a real big-time feel across the board. But that was never possible. They hit an almighty snag in the form of Vince McMahon, and just like that, The Big Bang, well, it was snuffed out. All of this leaves us with one of the biggest what-if scenarios in American wrestling history. Who knows what would have happened had Bischoff and Beadle's deal gone through and the Big Bang pay-per-view gone down. You can conjure all kinds of crazy scenarios there, from WCW continuing, thriving, recovering, maybe even still being around today. Or maybe they were just papering over the cracks. Maybe they were just prolonging the inevitable and the company would have went bust anyway. Either way, actual details on this show are kind of scarce. They've never been fully divulged. We do know that the Big Bang was going to be held in a 3,000-seater stadium in Las Vegas, but there's not really a whole lot else going around. It was billed as the creation of the new WCW, which sounds promising, but they've marketed things like that before in the past. There's actually some details on the commentary team, which is quite interesting. Joey Styles was invited to be part of it, but opted to stick with ECW for a while instead, re-signing in January 2001. Don Callis was talked about, even Jerry Lawler, who was experiencing a spell away from WWE at the time. Those names were all brought into the mix, but really, that's about all we've got. But beyond that, I guess all we can really say for sure is that it would have continued offering an alternative to the product that Vince McMahon was putting out, and it would have staved off the wrestling monopoly for at least a short while longer. And of course, success would have been an almighty challenge. Prospering in WCW in 2001, think of all the hurdles they would have had to leap over. The company posted a loss of between $60 and $80 million in 2001. The creative team, the output was an absolute shambles. There's a reason people liken WWE, modern WWE programming when it's bad, to late era WCW. They did the same for TNA when it was farting out some of its worst content. The shows on a week-to-week basis, there were signs of improvement in the very last few weeks. Greed was actually a pretty damn good pay-per-view, but for the most part, if you take those last few years, they're not good, brother. But to the end of all this, we'll never really know what could have happened. Jamie Kellner, his fateful decision changed the course of wrestling history forever. It wasn't until the emergence of AEW in 2019 that WWE faced serious competition again. They had a monopoly for the best part of 20 years. The habits picked up by WWE during this untouchable period have led them to believe that they're going to be bulletproof forever, and when you look at the balance sheet, when you look at the financials, I mean, they've got good reason to believe that, but it has also left us with some deeply ingrained creative habits that they could get away with for years and work to the product's detriment. It hasn't been an ideal situation whatsoever for viewers, for people who just want to sit down and enjoy a wrestling show. And even with the arrival of AEW and that promotion's relative success, it looks like, for now, iron doesn't sharpen iron. Vince McMahon is going to plod along regardless, emboldened, if you will, by 20 years of just sitting on a big pile of money. Under McMahon's stewardship, the WCW name all but fizzled out. It faded away before it could truly burn out. And as for Eric Bischoff, well, he was in WWE by the following year anyway, so it worked out alright for Eazy-E. But anyway, guys, that's it. That's my take on the history of the WCW Big Bang pay-per-view that never was. But as always, I want to know what you guys think. So hit the comment section, let us know. Plop some fantasy scenarios down there as well. Do you think WCW would have died anywhere? Or do you think it would still be here today? There's a lot of stuff to unpack. Throw those theories down there. I love reading them. Then you can like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Follow us on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE and myself at Andy H. Murray, where you can tell me how wrong I am. Goodbye.